Thank you for joining us on the Therapist's Invitation. I was about to say Candid Conversations. I'm Trever Sharon.
I'm Mark Mayfield. It's okay. You're getting used to this new, it's been a while. But
it does. Yeah. Okay, so Mark, here's my question for you today.
Okay.
We know that creativity is a really powerful tool for mental health.
Okay.
It's really good for us. Something that we should try to engage in frequently.
Sure.
Grows our brain, all this stuff. We also know that crisis is a time where our brain is physiologically responding. And there are certain parts of our brain that in the midst of crisis are going to be turned off. And even if it's, not an emergency, but just a lingering crisis or trauma response over time, there are still parts of our brains that are shut off. And I was thinking the other day that, it seems like a lot of those parts of our brain that are shut off in crisis or an emergency or trauma responses are the parts that we engage when we're creative. And so it would make sense, be creative in the midst of, emergency, crisis, trauma. And also, as I say that, it sounds really silly.
Yeah, it does. It's like, why would I get creative when I'm
or how
fighting for my life?
Yeah.
Or I think I'm fighting for my life. Yeah.
So can you be creative in crisis?
Well, I think you have to be. I mean, honestly, I think there's an opportunity there. Let's just put it that way. There's an opportunity there to engage the plasticity of the brain in the way that it needs to be. So plasticity, for those that don't know, is basically the ability for the brain to grow and change over time. And it does it either for good or bad, right? I mean, so when I am sitting in my unforgiveness and bitterness, I am changing my neural connections for not positive, right? I'm getting these new ruts that are stuck. When I'm going through a crisis, my brain is changing in that it's keeping me alive. The fight, flight, or freeze mechanism is kicked on, right? The sympathetic nervous system, it gets kicked on. And so that, brain, the blood flow really goes to our muscles and our organs. Digestion slows. We're not as hungry. Our pupils dilate or not restrict. And, we are always looking out for struggle. I understand why that was created, especially in a pre-industrial world, right? It's self-preservation, it's protection. But in our current state, we don't have a mountain lion, unless you live up in the mountains, like a mountain lion that's waiting to attack us at the door, or we don't have, that type of physical danger as much. Now, there are certain people in our country that do. I get that. And actually, I don't get that. I realize that. And it's not that like that. It doesn't have to be like that. I'm babbling first. But, I think one of the things that we need to realize is that if we are going to overcome and move through our trauma, that intentionally engaging in creativity is going to change the course of our neural development.
So I'm going to take this from that deep level that you brought us to.
Sorry.
Into a goofy one.
Go for it.
So we can dive back into the series. I keep thinking of MacGyver.
Okay, for those that don't know who that is.
So MacGyver is
because most of our listeners might not know who that is.
Rightly. So MacGyver is an old show where essentially this guy, I don't even remember the premise of the show enough, but he would find himself in situations where he was either trapped in a room or had to do something. It was basically like A-Team, which is another outdated reference.
Or it was also like the Pink Panther too, where,
he'd find himself in these situations having to save some damsel in distress. And all he had was a paper clip and some gum and had to blow up a door. Yeah. And so the kind of humor was MacGyver could make anything out of anything, even if it didn't make any sense whatsoever. And that takes a lot of creativity. So in the midst of MacGyver, or in my mind, MacGruber from SNL.
Oh, gotcha. Yes.
We have this bomb and we have to turn it off or something with only like a noodle, like a spaghetti noodle. Like it takes a lot of
and not a raw one, a cooked one.
Yeah.
Okay.
It takes a lot of creativity
Right.
to find a way to do that. But
Right.
you're also in the midst of a actual emergent crisis. And I think one of the reasons that that show lives in infamy as humorous is because it feels so unrealistic that, not only the things that he can create out of odds and ends, but that you would be able to think that way in the middle of an emergency.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think you are able to think that way. I think you need to have people in your life that can help you think that way.
Say more.
Well, when we're in the fight, flight, or freeze mode, we are singularly focused. Protection, preservation. And so I think, well, two things. I think having somebody that you can speak into your life about creativity, so a friend, a counselor, clergy, whatever that might be. Or as one of my mentors says, preparing for your battles in a way that is, like, okay, who knows what's going to come up down the road. But if this happens, here's how I'm going to respond to it. Here's what I'm going to do. So we're already creating a solution to something that's not happened yet.
Yeah.
And we're creating that narrow pathway in our brain as well. But, one of the things that I did a lot of, and people will laugh at me, but I love Legos. And so to this last year, we budgeted and had some of my fund money set aside where I got these, 12, 14, 1,500 piece cars, model cars that I built, going through this. And that was, for me, it was just a creative outlet to escape some of the struggle and to engage that part of the brain that likes putting things together. I also did a lot of woodworking projects this year, and I'm getting better at it. Yeah. But I enjoyed that. Like, I built out our closet to have bookshelves and new hanging, all that kind of stuff. And that was creativity for me that in the midst of chaos.
So what I'm hearing is that with this silly example, I'm going to walk away from it in a second. Silly example of MacGruber. It's
SNL.
MacGyver, both are equally silly in my opinion. It's the idea that he can't do that, but if he has somebody else to engage him that way, it feels more realistic. Yeah. I'm even thinking about, we talk a lot when somebody is feeling very suicidal in the midst of an attempt or about to activate a plan. There's a tunnel vision that happens. And so part of creating a safety plan and safety factors is when you get that tunnel vision, you can't look for other options.
It's hard.
You're set on this course.
It's not impossible, but it's hard.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so providing those options beforehand or having people in your life to provide those options is essential. And so maybe the answer to the question of, like, can you be creative in crisis is no. And also someone can invite you into that and activate that brain with you.
Sure. I mean, maybe it's a no and, or no but, or a yes and a yes but, maybe it's something like that where it's not as easy as a yes or no. And that's okay. There's a bigger answer to that. I think part of this though goes, what are you doing? And this, we talked about this in a different episode too, of just what are we feeding our mind, body, and spirit during those times? So if we are consciously taking care of ourselves, like, I'm not eating a bag of Cheetos and drinking a Mountain Dew for lunch every day. I'm eating good food. I'm eating healthy. I'm getting sleep as best as I can. I'm exercising consistently. Doesn't have to be every day, but consistently, where I'm getting my heart rate up and that kind of stuff. And I'm engaging in emotionally deep and healthy conversations with people, whether it be paid conversations with a counselor or family. Then when we enter into crises, we have those resiliency factors already in place that we can fall back on. And I think part of what saved me last year, and you knew this, is that I, lost like 65 pounds in the midst of a very chaotic year. Yeah. But it was something that I had to be able to look forward to, that I've got goals. I'm a competitive person. So I'm going to okay, I'm only going to do X amount of calories today, and I'm going to do keto, and I'm going to, then next week I'm going to, whatever that looks like. Yeah. But then I was and am working out on the treadmill 4 or 5 days a week. That was good for me. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but that was good for me. And that created some brain space to be able to react better. I told my wife the other night, I couldn't imagine what last year would have been like if I was at my heaviest. I probably would have fallen into a deeper depression, followed, a lot of different things. And so I think those resiliency factors need to be in place or prior to a crisis, and maybe they're not. But I don't know what that speaks to you.
Yeah. Well, I just think, even in EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, a form of trauma therapy, there's this concept that we can work through distressing events or distress in general,
right,
with social modulation, or basically engaging our social
networks.
lives, by doing this in relationship with another person. And so I think there's a lot of beauty to that, of what does it look like for you to take this conversation and go draw something, to take a conversation with another person and try to have them engage you in creative processes, to engage planning for when things get hard, and how you can do other things. I do a practice with a lot of my clients called the coping grid. And it's just laying out all of our coping strategies in a way that allows us to think of more than we would normally think of if we were just writing them down. And that'll be available on the Mayfield Collective as well, if you're interested in that. But it's important for us to be able to go back afterwards and say, like, oh, those are the 50 coping skills that I have, instead of the 0 that I could think of just now.
Well, and I also think too, you're probably thinking already countering us. Well, I'm not a good drawer. I'm not a good musician. I'm not a good. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just try something.
Yeah.
Like if you've always wanted to do piano and you're 50 years old, like watch some YouTube, get a keyboard, start playing around with it. It engages the brain. You don't have to be perfect at something.
Or just create a world in your head.
Right.
Explore memories.
Right.
Like, that's creative.
Or draw. Well, you just can do stick figures. Okay, start with stick figures, and then watch a YouTube on how to draw a face, and then perfect that, and then move on to whatever. If you don't want to do that, get a stinking mandala, coloring book, and color, and get 180 colored pencils of different colors, and just spend time coloring that, and be creative with that. Like, you're gonna find an excuse for everything, or you're going to go, you know what? Okay, let's try.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, there is a hurdle in the midst of, whether our brain is shut off or we haven't activated our creativity in a long time.
Right.
Reactivating that can be really, really hard, but it doesn't mean it's impossible.
No, nothing's impossible. Only if we allow it to be.
I can't fly yet on my own.
Well,
by my own will.
Okay, that's true. I guess some things are impossible. but when it comes to figuring out these creativities, I think we try to put impossibilities on labels on things where it's not.
Yeah.
You even just pick up a book and read. Get lost in a novel. Get lost in a fantasy. Get lost in something like that, where things that we used to do as kids, we don't do as much as adults anymore. I think is really good.
Yeah.
I think movies and TV shows are okay, but they don't do the same thing to the brain as that. So, what are your ideas? Like, I'd love to hear from our listeners what their ideas are on this, what they've tried, what they've experienced. I think one thing that I like to do is, when I'm struggling, my creativity comes out in the kitchen. I enjoy cooking. And so experiencing new things, trying new things. And I had some successes this last year with things that people would not normally think that you could cook and it would taste well, like cow heart.
I love cow heart.
Yeah. And so good stuff. Good for you too. But I made it and my daughters enjoyed it before they realized what it was, because it tasted, it didn't taste organy.
It tastes like a really good steak.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff for me is where I get creative. I will say that the piano idea is something I've always wanted to do, or learning a new language, and I just haven't, and I need to.
Yeah. I think that's the challenge to all of us, is find something and be creative today.
Yeah.
Build these practices now,
right?
In crisis or not, so that we have the options. We have that part of our brain vibrant.
Yeah, absolutely.